I want to, you guys know who I am, but I want to introduce our co-moderator, Alicia Staley, to you. So, Alicia, would you like to introduce yourself and also maybe say a few words about patient-centered outcomes research and also maybe give your perspective as a patient who has participated in patient-centered outcomes research?
Sure, absolutely. My name is Alicia Staley. I'm a 3-time cancer survivor. I was first diagnosed with Hodgkin's lymphoma when I was a sophomore in college, over 26 years ago. I was subsequently diagnosed with breast cancer in 2004 and again in 2008. I have been a patient advocate since I joined Twitter in 2008 and realized that I was among friends and cancer survivors in ways that I never thought were possible. So over the last almost 10 years now of advocacy work that I've done, I've been fortunate enough to work on some PCORI grant projects as a patient advocate and providing the patient perspective. And I think it's very important to include the patient voice when considering patient-centered outcomes. So I'm going to take a moment and just share a definition from PCORI.org. So if you visit PCORI.org, that's the organization that actually has the formal definition of patient-centered outcomes research. And one of the things that I've been finding in my advocacy efforts is if you don't start with a shared definition of what you're working toward, everybody's answer is going to be wildly different. So just quickly, patient-centered outcomes research helps people and their caregivers communicate and make informed healthcare decisions, allowing their voices to be heard and assessing the value of healthcare options. This research answers patient-centered questions such as, given my personal values, what should I expect will happen with me? What are my options and what are the potential benefits and harms to these options? What can I do to improve the outcomes that are most important to me? And how can clinicians and their care delivery systems that they work in help me make the best decisions about my health and my health care? So given that as sort of the set point of what we're talking about today, I'd like to just turn it to the panel very quickly and say, understanding that definition and understanding the work that you've done over the years in this area, what's been the biggest challenge for you taking on a project like you have patient-centered outcome research?
Well, I guess I can step in. I've been thinking a lot about the fact that we've been using the word or the phrase, why is this so hard? And that's been playing around a little bit in my mind. And I think part of it is that we still are approaching this in parallel. We're still doing a lot of the traditional things we do, and then we do some of the patient-centered work, and it still is not well integrated. So we'd be exhausted anyway, but we're really exhausted because not having that integration is making it difficult. I sort of some days even feel I put my PCORI hat on, and then I put my traditional hat on, if you will. So I think as we work more and more to be able to integrate that, it will help. But that's certainly one of the challenges I find.
And I'll just say that thanks to PCORI, we have a whole new horizon for research that's outcomes-based. And you can almost think of it as like a parallel track. Look, there's been observational research for a long time, registries, right? So they go and they look back observationally at characteristics, and that's how we know what we know. But patient-centered outcomes research and registries like Arthritis Power and patient-powered research networks are both observational research because they're linked and ported to those EHRs, but they're also evolving every day you use it because you get something back. So the difference between a patient-powered research network and patient-centered research and observational research is the difference between observational research and patients being a part of a community, patients having insight, shared decision-making, understanding, so that ultimately there's better outcomes. And that's not to say that observational research is bad. but it is to say that the future is evolving very rapidly. And the challenge, to your question, is to help some of the older paradigm researchers, some of the older school thinkers, understand that the future is today. It's now. And we have to incorporate the technology and some of these components that PCORI, for example, has funded into this new paradigm, which is very exciting for patients.
William, anybody else?
What I would say as it relates to the work we do, we've tried to be very clear to focus on discrete patient populations where the therapeutic protocols, how those patients are managed, are pretty well understood. Because sometimes in some of the different areas, it's all over the board, and there's an argument that would argue that you should do more of that then to improve it. But even the ones that are really standardized, I think it's important, like for instance, we picked diabetic retinopathy because it's a very well understood disease in terms of disease progression and how it moves, et cetera. And so any of our tools, which you could argue would be patient-centered tools, can plug nicely into that, and then it actually supports the existing protocols that are already in place. And so that's at least how we've thought about it, is to be very careful in the areas that we want to focus so that we make sure that once we objectify it and build tools around it, you don't run into the noise of the particular disease or target, if you will.
I just want to caution two things. Two speakers earlier, one said there's no straight answer in medicine, right? It depends. And so I don't want to lose that. It does depend, and no matter how big the trials are and how many endpoints cofactors we control for, there still has to be the concept of individualized medicine, doctor and patient in there. And I just don't want the endpoint here being these prescriptive algorithms that everyone must follow. I don't think that's going to work. And the other speaker from the Dell Medical School, when he said, it takes 15 years to get a drug approved. I mean, I tell you, I'm the ice bucket of water up here, okay? I hear this stuff, and I'm like, oh my gosh, if we're going to do these kind of endpoints, it's going to take 25 years to get a drug approved, and the patent life's only 20. So we're not going to get anywhere. So I just think that we constantly have to worry about what the effect this has on innovation and individual patient decision making. And I'd like to hear what Larry has to say about that, because he sees patients.
Well, William, actually, I want to hear what you have to say.
All right.
So, behind stage, actually, William, you were telling me that you run a very interesting center where you are in Oklahoma, because you combine a center that looks at data, so from a research perspective, to do predictive analytics, and you combine that insight with implementation expertise. So you have data excellence and research in the same place that you have implementation expertise. What I have to say in answering Joseph's question, what I have to say is I'm very interested in knowing what William's experience is when you combine research expertise with implementation expertise under one roof. How can you accelerate innovation into reality, into implementation? Can we shorten 15 years into 3 years?
Well, we've already done that. I mean, if you look at our center, we have currently 3 innovations actually actively being tested through my implementation network, and we'll launch our 4th one, the diabetic retinopathy algorithm, probably in the next quarter. So that'll be the 4th innovation that we've actually pushed into the marketplace. I can tell you the truth, or do you want the truth, or do you want me to tell you how we kind of did it and it worked out? So the reality is, and we're all jaded by our histories and what our backgrounds are. So prior to taking on this center for 20 years, I was an investment banker at JP Morgan. I worked at Merck in business development, and I was in venture capital for 15 years. And I've always been focused on implementation, because I know in venture capital it's all that matters. Execution, implementation, it's all that matters. All the rest of it is kind of interesting but noise. So by way of history, that was always a fundamental principle of mine building the centers. I wanted to make sure that we had kind of the implementation capability, not just the innovation. That's point one. Point two is we're not a department, we're actually a center. And because of that, that allows us to grab and form all sorts of these interdisciplinary, cross-functional interactions that makes all of this happen. So if you looked at the list of faculty researchers and students that have worked for us, they would probably run 15 departments, you know, from industrial engineering to computer science to internal medicine to ophthalmology to, and because of that, I think maybe just the nature of the fact that the center was its own independent entity, and we didn't really have a department, we didn't have faculty, so we just drawed on whoever we needed to actually, so the first was defining the strategy to make sure that we had the innovation implementation, but the second was, because we weren't hindered by a particular department, we just pulled in those capabilities. And so maybe the magic sauce was just the cross-functional integration among all these different departments within the university to make all this happen.
So,
Venture capital. Venture capital.
That always helps.
And it looks like we're almost out of time.
just one comment to the panel then as we're closing. What's next? I mean, where do we go from here, and how do we move this forward? How do we take these examples that are truly pockets, excellence, but pockets of excellence? How do we scale this and move it forward?
Let's get maybe three words from each person.
The JAMA article Rob Califf wrote with every other expert in healthcare about the learned health system.
Okay.
Great.
Ruth.
Not being afraid to make mistakes. It's at least a start.
I like it. William.
I would say one word, just focus.
Joseph.
Don't squelch innovation in the process.
Okay. Thank you very much. Round of
Thank
applause
you.
for our